So many experienced professionals know deep down that they're done with corporate, but actually making that leap is often the most terrifying part. Today's guest, Clare Wearn, has been there. After over 20 years in senior HR roles, including as a HR business partner for global businesses, she reached a point where she knew she'd had enough. But what does enough really even mean? And what finally happens when you make that step away? Today, Claire runs CML People Solutions, helping businesses navigate the complexities of people management while also coaching professionals through their career challenges and opportunities. Claire, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much.
I know this is your first podcast, so I'll go easy on you.
Thank you
We'll
very much.
start with something, hopefully, that is easy for you to answer. Now, I've heard that you're learning to be a DJ. How's that going?
So yeah, I have started to DJ. So we inherited a set of DJ decks from a friend, and I've always liked music. I'm not creative in the sense of I can't play the piano, I can't play any instruments, but I always get a real sense of peace when I listen to music. So yeah, I have a set of decks on a kind of Friday night after work. Sometimes it's just nice to decompress by playing some really kind of loud music. Luckily, I'm in a detached house. Lets out a bit of creativity as well, because when I mix two songs together and it lands really well, I'm like, yes, yes. So it's just a bit of a release, really.
And is that something you did in your past, or is that something brand new?
No, it's something I did. I mean, when I was 18, 19, 20, I worked, in hospitality and bars. So I've always been around music. But no, it wasn't something that I did when I was younger. It's just something that I've picked up as I've got older. But you won't find me at Tomorrowland anytime soon headlining a 3 hour set. So
So that's probably something people that have worked with you don't know about you. Is there anything else that
anything
would
else?
surprise them?
Anything else that would surprise them? I suppose on the absolute contrast is I also like to get away into nature. During COVID, we invested in a really sort of cheap, small 3-man tent. And when you couldn't go anywhere overseas, we'd spend time in the UK just traveling around with our tent. And then we upgraded 2 years ago to a touring caravan. So now at the weekends, when we're just feel like getting away, we hook the caravan up, we go up to the Peak District and just sit in a field and just chill out. So the complete opposite of life as a DJ or DJing in my bedroom.
That's a really nice contrast, though, it must be for you.
Yeah, we spend a lot of time because I live on the Staffordshire Cheshire border, so we spend a lot of time in the Peak District. And soon as we get into that clear air space, I can almost feel like the shoulders dropping, everything relaxes, and you get into the summer seasons, and there's nothing better than sitting around like a campfire in a field with the sun setting. I just love that. Very much a sunset chaser.
I can very much relate to that. I'm definitely a sunrise and a sunset girl. I never know quite which one I love the most, but there's something
Yeah,
quite special about those times of day, aren't there?
yeah, absolutely. I love that time. It's like the calm before the storm of the working day.
So now that we've talked a little bit about who you are as a person, I want to take you back to when you were working for someone else in HR. Tell me a little bit about that and tell me specifically when you look back, what are the moments that you actually enjoyed about that job?
I think, very much enjoyed like my early career. I absolutely fell into HR as a profession. I didn't set out to do that. I was somebody that went back to uni in my mid 20s. Once I found what I loved, it was the career for me. And I think it's that wanting to help people. I look back at other potential career choices that I had. They were all like servient jobs in terms of wanting to help people, wanting to improve. So I think it was a natural step really once I found that spot. So that was what drew me into the profession. And I think once I found that space, and then had a really clear, definitive career path of what I wanted to achieve. So I was going to do my qualifications. I was going to be a HR manager by the time I was a certain age, a HR director by the time I was another certain age. I had a very linear career path. Wanted to go and work overseas if I could. And it was those things that kind of kept me involved in people. A real social preference. I like to work with and through people. So working in HR gives me that because I get the variety of the people aspects and I get to support other people in helping them to be better people managers. It was watching people grow and develop that was the real thing that I got an
Mm.
immense amount of joy from.
And it's interesting that you described there's almost like these milestones or this linear progression, as you described it, that you went through.
Yeah.
How important was that to you? If you think about all the other aspects of your life, how much
Oh,
importance did you put on that?
it was incredibly important at the time. And it's funny because I was reflecting last week, I was doing a graduate scheme and they have all coming out of university and they've all got very linear career paths. And I look back now at the point where I am at the, midpoint in my career and I think actually I had the same desires as they have in terms of that I want to do this by this age, etc. But my career path wasn't linear. And what I thought I wanted when I was 20, when I was there, I realized I didn't want that at all.
So when did that realization start happening for you?
I moved to the US with a company that I worked for. It was a great company that I worked for at the time, and they gave me some great opportunities. And they asked me would I be interested in moving internationally, and I was just come back from maternity leave. My son was nearly 1 when we moved to Missouri, and I snapped it with both hands at the time. But I think that was probably the moment when I realized, when I sit and reflect, that actually the further you progress up an organization, the more lonely it can become. Although I enjoyed my time in the US, US corporate culture is very different than the UK. And that's when I started to realize that maybe some of my values were not my values, did not always align with organizational values. So I came home and I took a career break. Lots of change at the time. So going through a separation and divorce. So I really just took a really simple job when I came back. And I got bored quite easily because it was a really easy job. I was probably a really well-paid HR advisor, and it was dead easy, but I wasn't challenged enough. So I moved into my last corporate job, and it was in a sort of fast-moving consumer goods business, brand-led, which is all the things that I liked most about working for the company in the US. But I never really found the right spot again after that. There was just something that wasn't right. I got to the point where I was like, it was actually starting to impact my health. The trigger for me leaving corporate life was the amount of stress that my body was in sort of fight or flight mode. And I was having reoccurrent episodes of shingles, which is all stress
Mm.
related. And it was at that point that I'm like, I need to do something different. And what does that different look like? That's when I thought, well, I could look at going self-employed. And I was like, actually, I might have something here for small to medium businesses that actually need that HR support, that need some leadership coaching. I could probably tap into that market a little bit. Once that thought was in my head, it was very hard to then shake it.
Yeah. Lots of people have those thoughts and think, what if, or I could do this.
Yeah.
But a lot of them just stay put, or they stay put for an extended period of time. What do you think the tipping point really was for you? So, was it the burnout? Was there something else going on there as well?
Yeah. I think it was very much that, I think it was the burnout. And I'm like, I can't keep running on this treadmill. And like the next big job for me would have been probably outside of that organization, moving into like a global HR director role, which would have meant a lot more travel. I only took 6 months off maternity leave when my son was born, and he's 8 now. I look back and I think, did I miss out on some stuff? And it's all around that work-life balance. I would say that it's a different work-life balance now. You think there's a utopia of working for yourself and you can come and go as you please, and it's not always the reality. You still have to service your clients, because if you're not servicing your clients, you're not earning any money. So there is a different kind of stress. But I think that really it was the burnout point, and I thought
Mm.
I'm in my early 40s. I potentially got another 20 years before I retire. And so do I want to be doing this, going on this hamster wheel for the next 20 years and it impacting my health further? So it was at that point when I was like, no, I need to do something. I want to be able to have more flexibility to be able to, go and pick my son up from school at the end of school if I want to, or to be able to work slightly different hours without the worry of how is it impacting on my career and what is that perception other people have of me
Mm.
if I do this. I wanted to do something different. And that
Mm.
was the point where I want to be a good role model to my family, but equally, and I had to think about the financial impact as well, because I am the main breadwinner in the household. So that was a massive,
Mm.
massive sort of thing to wrestle in my head about. I
Mm.
want to do this, but I've got bills to pay and mortgage to pay and all of that financial responsibility.
One of the biggest fears people have is how am I going to replace my salary? So how have you been navigating that since you obviously were wrestling with that, making the decision? How has that
I
kind of
think,
evolved from that point?
yeah, and it's something I still wrestle with. I was talking to a couple of former colleagues recently about, oh my God, you look like, it's a bit like LinkedIn is the corporate version of Instagram, and sometimes it looks like you're doing fantastically well and everything's, shiny and rosy in your world. And but underneath, you're like a swan paddling and going really quickly. It is nerve-wracking, and there are moments when you still do have that moment of, oh, what have I done? But I do a lot of business development. I do a lot of getting out there. Finding my new tribe of people has been really fundamental in helping as a support network. And I find the freelance, self-employed entrepreneur community really collaborative in their approach. There's no competition, which maybe you did find in corporate life. I do still struggle. I do still have what I call work wobbles or little moments of self-doubt where the little imposter jumps on my shoulder and says, well, don't be silly, you just go back to corporate life, Claire. But my mentality was not doing it was the failure. Doing it and it failing wasn't a failure because at least I've tried. I am someone that takes calculated risks. And I thought, what's the worst that can happen? The worst that can happen is get a bit tough and I go and find another job. And
Yeah.
that's really what kept my mindset going. I get a real sense of comfort looking at my cash flow forecast or looking at what's in my pipeline because I think, oh, well, I know that's coming and I can start to plan and budget and all of that sort of good stuff to make sure that the business is sustainable over the longer term. Yeah, I don't think you ever truly feel 100% comfortable all the time when you're working for yourself from a financial aspect. And no matter who I've spoken to in what profession, they all say the same. And I
Yeah.
get some comfort in I'm not going through that on my own either.
I can totally relate to that. I experience it myself. Every single person I coach is on a different part of that journey. And one of the major concerns that comes up is the finances.
Yeah.
Wherever you are, it's almost like you can never be comfortable enough. You talked earlier about different kinds of stress. So
Yeah.
the stress that you experienced in your corporate role and the stress that you sometimes experience now. Can you just tell me a little bit more about how that is for you?
Yeah. I think the stress in corporate life was about all around perception. How was I being perceived? Other people have got your career in their hands and they have the control of it in terms of succession planning and where your next role is. And I think that in itself is stressful. Now I've stepped away from corporate life. I think there is this almost you're in competition with everybody else. And as you get higher and higher up the organizational chart, you are in competition with a lot less people. So I think that was also quite stressful for me. Being away from home quite a lot. I traveled in my last corporate job up and down the country. When you've got a family and you've got those responsibilities, and I've got co-parenting responsibilities where I don't have my son for the first half of the week, but the back end of the week I do. I wanted to be able to prioritize that time when I do have him is really precious to me. If I was traveling, really wanted to travel at the first half of the week. And so that was almost limiting in sort of where I wanted to go in the future because I wanted to have some stability in when I could work from home and when I could travel and when I could go and visit other sites, which didn't always meet the expectations of what a business wants. That caused a degree of how I felt from a stress perspective. Whereas working for myself, it is the main stressor, I think, is that financial stressor. What if a client pulls a contract or they don't renew the services after the 12 months? Make sure you wear all the corporate hats as a self-employed person because you've got to do your marketing, your business development, your LinkedIn, all of that sort of stuff, as well as actually doing the job for your clients as well.
I sometimes say to people that I feel like I've learnt more about myself and about business in general over the
Absolutely.
last couple of years than I had in my entire corporate career. It sounds like you're having a similar experience.
Absolutely. I remember in my last corporate job, I remember somebody telling me that I didn't have commercial acumen. That actually really stung. There was somebody that had worked in a financial background in the past, and I was like, I think I have got commercial acumen. And actually, one of the things that I have realized is they were wrong because I'm running a business, I do my own accounts, I do my marketing. I do have commercial acumen, and I've learned so much in the last 12 months since I set up the business than I ever did in corporate life in 20 years.
It's interesting though, isn't it, that those labels always seem to come up.
Yeah,
And I think one of the things that's really struck me about my experience, and it just listening to you now, it sounds very similar, is this idea that, you've moved away from a formal job title as I'm a HR leader, I'm a HR business partner, I'm this, I'm that, I don't have commercial acumen, to being able to actually reframe yourself in a way that's much more personal and actually much more authentic to you.
absolutely. I've always brought my true, authentic self to work, and I remember working with a VP who was very much for bringing our true, authentic selves to work because it's hard work working outside of who you actually truly are. But I think I absolutely have embraced that a lot more. And I've stepped out of my comfort zone as well because sometimes in our professional life, we are comfortable where we're at and we know what we know, and we maybe dip our toe into a little bit of growth outside of that. Yeah, you push yourself outside of those comfort zones and you challenge yourself in ways that you didn't think you could do. I remember the first networking session I went to. I was absolutely terrified. I had to give myself a pep talk in the car park going, "No, Claire, if you want this, you've got to go out there." And I had to really give myself a talking to. If I want to do this, I've got to step out of that space.
So, what was it about the networking that made you fearful?
It's silly, really, because I think it was just I didn't know anybody, and I thought, what are they going to think? I felt like I was playing at running a business at that particular point. And actually, the very first networking session I went to, they were lovely. They were a lovely bunch. And I'd always worked primarily outside of my home location. So although I've always lived in Staffordshire or Cheshire, apart from when I lived in the States, I'd never worked in those areas. So my network locally to start to build and develop my business was practically zero. I had nothing. And so I knew I had to go out and get my name out there locally to start to build that business up. But it was terrifying because I thought, they don't know me and I don't know these people. And then it was fine. And I remember 6 months later, I went to another big networking event, and there must have been 150 people more in that room. And I could go and start up a conversation, and I knew people in that room. The first time I went into a networking room, I knew nobody. And I went to this big networking event, and I knew and could start conversations, and I knew more about people in that room than I did 6 months prior. So that was a bit of a win for me.
Celebrating those wins above just revenue is really important, isn't it? Those
Yeah.
milestones that come along.
Yeah, I do have a win wall of the small stuff, things that we do every day that brings us a little step further forwards. I also pick every year a word of the year. I've done it for the last few years,
Mhm.
and I always have that in on my win wall as well. As not like a manifesting thing, but just like to remind me of where I'm going, just to keep me anchored to the year of what my aim is.
Mm.
So obviously you don't have performance appraisals, thankfully, in self-employed life because they nobody likes them.
And what is your word for 2025?
My 2025 word is soar. It's about freedom, achievement, and it involves a sense of rising above challenges while staying calm and confident.
Wonderful. Mine's freedom, so very much relating to each other there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. For very much the same reasons. But it's this balance between the autonomy that you want to have, the space that you want to have to grow, but also creating enough freedom, particularly financially, to feel like that's not another thing that you're going to get stressed about. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's it. I always say, and I said this when I was in the process of stepping out of corporate life, what's meant for me isn't going to pass me by. And that's a real mantra that I use throughout life. If it's meant for me, it'll happen. If it's not meant for me, then that's fine. But what's meant for me isn't going to pass me by. And therefore, I have the faith and confidence that something will turn up. And if it doesn't, then, you just dust yourself off, bounce forward and find something else to do or go back into a slightly different corporate job.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point because I think some people think, well, if I try this, I have to make it work. I don't see it as linear. I mean, I've not ruled out taking a full-time job at some point in my future. I think it's
Yeah.
important actually to remember that, isn't it? You're not, you haven't swapped one for the other. This is just another part of exploring and experimenting and seeing what fits to your values, your
Yeah,
skills.
absolutely. And I know other independent HR consultants who have maybe taken a short-term interim role or they do some work with other HR consultants to build up their client base. As an independent person, you haven't got that team around you. And so having that other network of people in your profession that are willing to sort of step in, locally we've got a great HR community in Staffordshire. So having that network as well is really useful.
Because it can feel really lonely, can't it? Especially right at the beginning.
Oh God, I mean, yeah, I remember when I stepped away from corporate life, I almost kept the same routines. I would sit here at my desk and I would put my headset on. Like no one was going to ring me, but I would still sit here and put my headset on, and I still kept a lot of the same routines that I had, almost a bit like a security blanket, and I'd be sitting here building my website or doing some marketing stuff, and no one was going to ring because nobody knew what was going on, but I still had that like headset on just there in case somebody was going to ring me, just in case.
I can't help but smile when you say that. I can relate to everything you're saying about that, like breaking the habits of a lifetime, isn't it?
It's literally only taken me till like in the last few weeks not to wear my headset on my desk because I would literally just put it on. But yeah, I've
Mm.
kind of broken that cycle now.
Is there anything that you thought would be hard about moving on from corporate life that's actually been a lot easier than you expected?
I think building momentum has been easier. There are moments when it dips, but I think building that momentum and networking was definitely easier than I thought. But you do have to put the effort into building that network of people up. I definitely feel like getting into the headspace of looking at my accounts is easier. Even though I have no commercial acumen, I did a lot of homework as well.
Mm. I mean, I came from much more of a background of numbers being in sales, but being in control of that financial aspect and not outsourcing it completely to someone else has been really important to me too.
Yeah.
What would you say to someone like yourself who doesn't feel confident with numbers and they're thinking about running their own business? What would you say to them?
I actually went and did like a boosting women in business course with our local chamber of commerce, which gave me an understanding of how to put together the business plan, how to put together the financials, how to look at my cost sheets and all balance sheets and cash flow forecasting. And that helped learning from others who explain it in a really simple terms. I think once you've had that explained to you and you've got all of the information that you need, it made it so much more easier. Like it was just super simple. And you're able to ask in that safe space the silly questions. So I think find those avenues where you can pick up those resources and take the learning. That the first 6 months was literally me just building my knowledge base up whatever I needed to in terms of marketing, in terms of financials, the things that I felt I didn't have the knowledge in or had gaps in, and delving into those in greater detail. I also learn along the way as well. There's definitely been some areas where you think, oh, I maybe would do that differently, or, maybe take a different path.
What would you do differently if you look back now?
If I was to do anything differently, I would probably start networking a little bit sooner than what I did and finding my tribe. I think once I found my tribe of people, that was really the key to unlocking clients coming on board. They understood what I was able to do. And I think nailing down that piece of what is it that I do, because not everybody knows what the benefit of HR is. My close friends call me human remains in the nicest possible way. Uh, I'm like, or, that I just go in and fire people or make them redundant, and I do a lot more than that. People come with an expectation of what HR do and how we add value. And I think being able to narrow down exactly what I do and what benefit I add in a way that translates to small to medium businesses it was the key. And I didn't nail that quite so
Mm.
early on.
It's very hard though to do that for yourself, and that's been my experience that you go through so many iterations of that, and you end up beating yourself up when you look back at 6 months ago and go, "Oh, that was terrible," or you
Yeah.
look at your website copy from 6 months ago, "Oh, that was awful." And I
Yeah.
think it is just that continued evolution. How did you land on what you're doing now? Was it your love for HR that you wanted to continue? Was it just kind of the natural
Yeah.
step into doing it?
I think definitely it was the love of that people function. I
Mm.
do enjoy that side of things. I like the fascination of dealing with difficult and complex employee relations casework. But the one thing that I do more of now than I did in corporate life was that more kind of leadership development. I was always a generalist in corporate HR, so I could do a little bit of everything. But I absolutely love that sort of developmental side, that learn, that seeing people go through leadership development training and seeing them grow afterwards. Being able to set up the business where I can do the bread and butter stuff, people partnering alongside learning and development and creating programs or coaching experiences for individuals and groups. That gives me a nice balance that I didn't have as I progressed up or the organization in corporate life. As you get further up the sort of corporate ladder, you get to do less of that. You become more strategic. So being more in the L&D space is really inspiring for me as well. I get a lot of energy from that side of stuff.
And it also feeds into your social preference. Because just listening to you, it's so interesting because it's such a contrast, isn't it? That you had that fear of networking, but you have such a social preference.
I always say that I'm a introverted extrovert. So yeah, I know we both use a similar sort of profiling tool, and I'm a it depends person. So some days I'll show up and I'll be really outgoing and gregarious, and my social battery's fully charged. And other days I show up and I'm as quiet as can be. So that's also was quite difficult to navigate in corporate life because people never knew which Claire was going to turn up. Was she going to be the Claire that's going to be really chatty and engaged, or was it going to be the Claire that's going to take a step back and be reserved? And it wasn't that I wasn't engaged, it was just that I was taking a more reflective stance.
So you talked earlier about your career progression and how titles were important. How do you see success now that you've stepped away?
If you look at Companies House, I've got a title of director, everything, maybe that was the title I was always going after, global HR director. This title is so much more broader than just, a global HR director, which was the dream title that I was looking for. I was never going to be a VP of HR for a big corporate company. That was never my ultimate aim. But I think my role now is much broader. And I get involved in other stuff that I wouldn't get involved in. I get to be a bit more creative in terms of my social media outputs. I'll get to be a bit more creative in the artistic side of stuff in terms of, what does my brand look like? But I think we're never the finished product. So I think I'll continue to keep evolving and changing. And I think success for me now looks like being able to sustain my level of income that I had in corporate life and grow that business more. And it's around the greater flexibility. So I know that if I wanted to start the day later, there's nobody that's going to tell me. So success looks like being able to have that greater degree of flexibility while still being able to provide a nice life for my family because that they are the why that I do it.
Yeah, so it feels like you're closer connected to your why now. That's how it sounds.
Yeah, and I think I look back and I regret a little bit missing out on some of those early years because because I only took a very short period of time off for maternity leave. And then by the time my son was one, we'd moved to Missouri. And then I was full blown into corporate America. It was hard work, and I think I wanted to get some of that time back whilst he's still young to be able to appreciate that I can go and pick him up from school, or and I can go and watch him in his school assembly and not feel guilt because even though lots of great employers allow you to do that, there's still that mum guilt of, oh, I should really be at work. I feel like I'm kind of bunking off school and doing something I shouldn't be.
Yeah, I'm sure lots of people can relate to that
Yeah,
feeling of guilt. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. So I want to take you back to the DJing or to the love of music, should I say, that you mentioned at the beginning. If you could think of a song that sums up your career transition or inspires you to think about where you go from now,
yeah.
do you have one in mind?
I had a whole playlist when I was coming out of corporate life. I had a whole play
Fantastic. Maybe you can share it.
I had a whole playlist. I think I entitled the playlist Boss Lady because when I lived in America, my team bought me this little plaque that said Boss Lady on. So it's kind of been like something that's etched in my mind. So my song that kind of sums up where I was is a song by Sia called Courage to Change. And I would play that at like massive volume. I was like, yes, I have the courage to change. And when I was feeling particularly low, or if I was having that moment of self-doubt, I would play Birdie's Keeping Your Head Up. So that was also on my playlist. And then for those moments where I feel like I've been really successful, or like if I've signed on board a new client, I'd play Megan's Trainer Badass Woman. It'd be like my pump songs. I have a whole playlist that just keeps me motivated. So there is that link back to music making me feel something. Probably no surprise that I've picked up DJing as a bit of a hobby. Music helps me to understand how I'm feeling. And if I feel the need for a pick me up, I'll pick a song that's going to get me all pumped up.
Well, those will make some wonderful additions to the Change Unfiltered playlist. Music can just take you away from whatever you're feeling, or can take you towards something very positive as well.
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes if I need that moment to focus, or if I need just that time and space in my head, I'll just set the decks up, turn them on, and do a quick 20 minutes of listening to some music, and then I'll get back to it. I'll have worked out whatever I need to work out and be able to give myself some clarity and continue working a bit longer.
Mm. If someone's been listening and, how should I put it? They know they need to leave, they can feel it in their gut, right?
Yeah.
But they're scared to take the leap. What would you say to them?
I think I would say you'll never be fully prepared. There's never a right time to do it. And I've had this conversation with friends, people who are still in corporate life, and there is never a right time. There's always going to be that moment of doubt when you think fear is holding me back, the fear of not being able to earn any money. I didn't have a massive reserve of cash behind me that could see me through. I didn't have like a redundancy or anything like that where I had a slush fund to help me move this forward. I think I literally started the business with just a few £1,000s that I'd managed to save up for my last bonus payment from corporate life. And so that drove me as well because I knew I needed to build that business quite quickly. I knew I had probably a 3-4 month period of if during this time I can't get something in that's going to keep the finances ticking over, then I was also kind of caveating that, oh, I'll look for a corporate job in the meantime, just to give me that security. Because I was offered a corporate role and I was like, I didn't want to take it. There were so many red flags. I'm like, I don't want to take that job. And I thought, I just have to have trust in myself that I can do it. What's the worst that can happen? The worst that can happen is it might be a bit tricky for a couple of months or so. I will find something else to do. So just one, have the faith, and two, there's never a right time. Never a right time to do it. But if you feel that uncomfortable, you know that you need to leave from where you're at, then growth will happen outside of that area. You'll feel better about yourself. My health is much better. My mental health is better. Fear the fear and do it anyway. But that's my less risk aversion side coming out.
If, like us, there's someone out there listening who started up their business, but perhaps they're having one of those days, I think you described it earlier as a wobble day.
Yeah,
What would you say to them?
I would say that it's only a season that you're in. Christmas just gone, I had a moment where everything went quiet. Everybody was, and Christmas this year seemed to be longer. Like it was like a whole two and a
Yes.
half weeks. And I needed to feel during that time like I was doing something, being proactive and building the business because I just had that fear in me when everything stopped. Oh God, everybody stopped working, and is that going to come back? And I think having that confidence, I was genuinely like, oh my God, what if nothing comes back in the new year? And I think if you're having one of those work wobbles, it is just a point in time. Whatever gives you that sense of security that things will change, go into that space. For me, I go straight into my numbers and I look at my spreadsheet and I'll go, okay, so I know I've got this, and this coming in May. January, February, March, this is what I'm looking like. And this is where I need to plug the gaps and be proactive. Being proactive helps to keep me driving forward. So that gives me that sense of confidence. And know that it's normal. Every single person who is freelance or self-employed has those moments where we go, God, what have I done? Oh my God, there's nothing coming in. And just when you think that nothing's going to come in, something lands on your desk. Something will always turn up. What's meant for you isn't going to pass you by.
I really love that too. Well, thank you so much for being my guest.
You're welcome.
How can people get in touch with you if they've liked what they've heard?
Yeah, so I'm on LinkedIn. Clare Wearn. It might come up as Claire Locke because I like to go incognito. And Locke was my maiden name, Wearn was my married name. So find me on LinkedIn and connect with me there. I love to connect with new people. That's my social preference there coming out without a doubt. Connect with me on LinkedIn. You can find me there.
Perfect. Before I wrap up, I want to invite you to the Growth Lab. It's my free community designed specifically for experienced professionals who are curious, already considering a move, or actively going through a career transition. We meet every 6 weeks or so, and you don't have to have attended one before to join the next one. It's a space where you can step outside of your usual network, perhaps meet some familiar faces, but definitely some new ones who might just help you see your next move from a fresh perspective. If you're looking for real conversations, shared experiences, and a little bit of serendipity to help you figure out what's next, you're going to love it. You can sign up via the Change Unfiltered page on LinkedIn, or just send me a message and I'll forward you the details of the next one. So many moments in Clare's story will probably resonate with you. Maybe it's that creeping realization that the corporate world no longer fits, or that deep fear of what if I can't replace my salary, or even that feeling of being lost without the identity that work gave you. A few things really stood out for me. The fear of financial instability is real, but the only way to know if you could make it work is just to get started. And success doesn't have to look the way you thought corporate taught you it should, because Clare's version of success today hasn't been about job titles at all. It's about freedom, it's about flexibility, and a business that works for her life, not the other way around. So if you're stuck in corporate and wondering if there's more out there for you, this episode should be your reminder. You're not alone in this, and there are other possibilities out there. If today's episode resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Don't be shy. Send me a message, either by email or on LinkedIn. And if you're enjoying the podcast, the best way to support me is by subscribing, rating it, and sharing this episode with someone who might need to hear this conversation. Also, if you want more behind the scenes insights and to find out a little bit more about me, I have a few solo episodes where I share more about my own journey. So check out episodes 11, 14, and 17. And of course, don't forget to pick up Clare's song recommendations from the growing Change Unfiltered Spotify playlist, which, by the way, you can find linked in the show notes. Until next time, keep embracing change with an open heart and an unfiltered mind.